The Mask of Zorro, 1998. What fictional characters were the inspiration for the fictional heroic icon Zorro? Which other actors were considered for the role of Don Diego de la Vega? What did legendary swords trainer Bob Anderson think of Antonio Banderas' swordsmanship? These and more questions will be answered on this episode of
Back Look Cinema, the podcast.
I didn't ask for your help in the cantina, but I came here to learn how to fight like you, to have your strength, your courage. Now when I try to use them, you slap me down? Let me tell you something. I am tired of all your training, your lecturing. I am tired of waiting for you to tell me I am ready. I have my own scores to settle. A new life to find. I thought I could do it here. I was wrong. Hello, my name is Zo. It's spelled Z-O or Z to the O for those of you outside of the U.S. Welcome back, friends. This is Back Look Cinema, the podcast, where we take a look back at the movies of yesteryear, especially the movies of the latter half of the last millennium. If you like what you're about to hear, then please tell your family, tell your friends, and share this secret with your closest of comrades and confidants about Back Look Cinema. Now, I've been a fan of Zorro for a very long time. Zorro is, in comic stories and apparently in real life, the inspiration for Batman. I remember being dedicated to the Walt Disney's Zorro TV series starring Guy Williams. The all-black getup, the black horse, the sword, the whip. Zorro inspired my imagination of heroism. He was charming, cunning, skilled, and brought justice to those who were oppressed. He fought with a smile and made fools of his adversaries. The character continues to endure for more than 100 years. In my research, I was surprised as to how many of the characters in the movies were based on historical figures. Joaquin Murrieta is a legendary Mexican bandito. The details of his life are hard to confirm and mostly come from one sensationalized novel. It was said that he and his family were brutally attacked and his land taken by Americans not long after California statehood. He roamed the countryside attacking those who wronged him and led a gang who mercilessly robbed and killed people. He was also seen as a symbol for Mexican resistance against the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant colonization of California, since Native Americans, Mexicans, and Spanish colonists were there first. He was the partial inspiration for Zorro. In the Mask of Zorro film, Joaquin has a fictionalized brother named Alejandro, who later succeeds Don Diego de la Vega as Zorro. Murrieta was hunted down by another real-life character, Captain Harrison Love, a former Texas Ranger and Mexican War veteran, was tasked by California Governor John Bigler to lead the California Rangers to hunt down Murrieta and his gang. As depicted in the film, Captain Love killed and cut off Joaquin Murrieta's head and kept it preserved in brandy for display. Unlike the film, Love and his Rangers took the severed head on tour and charged people $1 to see it. It is disputed as to whether or not the man he killed was the actual Murrieta, and it's been alleged that the severed head was actually that of an innocent man. He also went on tour with the severed hand of another historical figure, Three-Fingered Jack, also known as Manuel Garcia. He had a small but important role in the film, and in real life, he was the member of Murrieta's gang. So that's 3 people that the film used who actually existed historically. And the mix of characters based on real people in the narrative of this fictional story, while including some historical events, was very clever. So now that we have some background on Zorro, let's talk about the film a little bit in the opening credits. Opening credits of The Mask of Zorro from 1998. Don Diego de la Vega is steeped in his defeat in a dirty and cruel prison. His family was once the richest and most influential of the families of Alto California. He once donned a black mask and rode out to liberate the people of California from unjust rule, only to ultimately have his estate burned, his wife murdered, and his daughter kidnapped by his mortal enemy. After 20 years in captivity, he sees an opportunity for revenge, a chance to reclaim his daughter who does not know him, and he encounters a promising young pupil who also has a need for retribution. De la Vega sees an opportunity to raise a champion to fight corruption and evil as he once did, and inherit the Mask of Zorro. Released July 17th, 1998, produced by TriStar Pictures, Amblin Entertainment, and David Foster's production. It grossed over $94 million in the US and Canada, and over $250 million on a reported budget of $95 million. So it kind of just squeaked past to get it a modest profit. I guess you would call this a modest hit. And then if you would adjust it for today's inflation, it would be over $190 million in the US and Canada, or $506 million worldwide on a reported budget of $192 million. So basically what that kind of means that if they only released the film in the US and Canada, then it would have flopped. But they really made their profit by releasing it worldwide. And that surprised me because I'm going to jump the gun and say I really enjoyed this film. It's like I enjoyed it when I first saw it. Of all the times that I rewatched it, I enjoyed it on this rewatch. I really am enamored by this film. And because it's like the fact that it's a character that I always liked is kind of a bonus. And they took a character that I have always enjoyed and make a fantastic movie out of it. I'm just thrilled to pieces. And I am surprised that it almost flopped. I'm surprised that it didn't make more money. And maybe the film was too expensive. I don't know. I don't understand. But that's the way it kind of shakes out. This film starred Antonio Banderas, and he played Alejandro Murrieta, who sometimes disguised himself as Don Alejandro Castillo y Garcia, who disguised himself as Zorro, or Fox in English. You may have seen Antonio Banderas in Puss in Boots, Spy Kids, Desperado, which we covered in episode 45. Philadelphia, we covered that in episode 156, and that featured author Emily Marinelli, who wrote Comfort Sequels. And he was also in Uncharted, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I know that there are a lot of people that are down on this movie, but they felt like a lot of it was miscast. But I really liked what they were trying to do and where the film went. Also in this film was Anthony Hopkins. He played Don Diego de la Vega, who is the original Zorro, but also later disguises himself as Bernardo. And we'll talk about Bernardo later on. He's been in The Silence of the Lambs, which we covered in episode number 54, The World's Fastest Indian, Nixon, and notably in Thor. Catherine Zeta-Jones played Elena Montero, whose name was originally Elena de la Vega, and you may have seen her in Chicago, Traffic, Entrapment, and High Fidelity. I remember watching Chicago, but it's been so long ago, I don't remember her in that movie. Also, the same with Entrapment. But although I somewhat enjoyed Chicago, I don't know how good I enjoyed Entrapment. Entrapment was kind of fuzzy. Up next is Stuart Wilson. He played Don Rafael Montero, and you might have seen him in Hot Fuzz, Lethal Weapon 3, or Enemy of the States. And I seen Enemy of the States. I can't remember the part or the role that he played when he was in it. But that was episode number 154, and that featured Rob Fredette from the Hodgepod podcast with Rob Fredette. Matt Letcher played Captain Harrison Love, and you might have seen him in Her, Identity, or Gods and Generals, where I imagine he played a similar character as he played in this film. The last actor I included on this list is Victor Rivers, and he plays Joaquin Murrieta, who, as I mentioned earlier, is based on a real-life person. And you might have seen him in Blood In, Blood Out, The Distinguished Gentleman, and Amistad. And also, Captain Harrison Love is also based on a living person. This movie was directed by Martin Campbell, and you might have seen some of his other movies. And as I went through the list of the movies that he did, he has a proclivity for action movies. For example, Casino Royale, Vertical Limit, GoldenEye, The Protege, which came out recently. I think I saw it like a couple of years ago. I was a little bit disappointed in that movie. Edge of Darkness and The Foreigner, all of these are action thrillers. So this is something that he really digs. It was written by Johnston McCulley, Ted Elliott, and Terry Rossio. I think I said that right. It's either Rossio or Rossio. I'm not exactly sure. At any rate, John William Johnston McCulley, he lived from 1883 to 1958. He wrote the original stories as a pulp magazine serial called The Curse of Capistrano. Capistrano is referencing San Juan Capistrano, California. The serial was published in All Story Weekly magazine between August 9 and September 6, 1919. The stories were hugely popular and adapted into a silent film titled The Mask of Zorro in 1920, which was also successful. Not only did this encourage McCulley to write more magazine stories about Zorro, but the original series of stories was then repackaged and published under the title The Mask of Zorro. While he published many other stories and wrote screenplays, Zorro is by far his most enduring creation. And some of the other movies that he wrote were The Ice Flood, South of the Rio Grande, Outlaws of Stampede Pass, The Red Rope, and Captain Fly-by-Night. And if you don't know these movies, don't worry about it. I don't know them either. These movies are very, very old. Remember, this guy started out in the silent film era. And now we move on to the writing team of Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio. It seems that they derived elements of this story from a book called The Life and Adventures of Joaquin Murrieta, the celebrated California bandit, published in 1854 by a Cherokee man named Yellow Bird, also known as John Rollin Ridge. It's considered to be the first novel published in California and the first published by a Native American. They've also written Shrek, The Lone Ranger from 2013, Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, and basically that whole series, Aladdin, and National Treasure, Book of Secrets. It also seems that there are some script writing credit shenanigans going on with this movie, because according to an account in the book, Tales from the Script, published in 2010 by Peter Hansen and Paul Robert Herman, David S. Ward rewrote approximately 85% of the dialogue, but received no on-screen credit, a predicament that spawned enough controversy to merit a front-page article in the Los Angeles Times. So, he may not have gotten his credit before, but he shall get it here. The music was composed by James Horner. I love the way he incorporated elements of chords and rhythms that we might imagine in Mexican music with the more traditional European style. Obviously, I remember him for the themes that he's done for Star Trek movies, but he's also done compositions for Streets of Fire, Gorky Park, Heaven Help Us, Commando, and An American Tale. I've probably mentioned these credits before. And that's all I have for the opening credits. And now we're going to move on to our favorite parts. So, as far as the themes of this movie, it seems to me that there are themes of defeat and how we handle defeat, loss, revenge, and justice. And also a rebuilding of oneself, like breaking yourself down or somebody breaking you down and then building up a new person or rebuilding yourself, and specifically to accomplish a goal. A lot of times we see this in a lot of, I guess, hero's journey movies. And this is kind of that. This is kind of a hero's journey movie. Or something like a military movie where they're dealing with basic training, any kind of training movie like Top Gun, or I don't know, what's that other movie? I can't remember. There's a movie that I'm thinking about that I wanted to do in this podcast, and I can't think of it right now, but it's basically, it's a famous movie. If I could, it starred a real drill sergeant. And I can't think of the name right now. And that I mentioned that it starred a real drill sergeant. You're probably screaming at me the name of this film right now. But it's on the tip of my tongue. I can't bring the title to mind. At any rate, you have military movies that deal with training. They have the same thing where they break down the trainees and rebuild them into service members who engage in warfare. There are so many things about this movie that I find striking. A lot of things that I loved. I mean, the list, I always try to limit it to something like 5 things, but there's so many things about this. I enjoyed the story, like the overall story, that it starts as a tragedy. I enjoyed the costumes, the music, the casts, like everything just worked out so good in this movie. Now, the story is, or the plot, I should say, is a little bit simple. And there are some points where there are some controversies. And there are some points where it's like, some slight plot holes. But overall, like the minor, the minor failures or the minor misgivings that I might have about some of the plot elements of this movie do not overtake my overall enjoyment of the movie. Like, the action sequences are to die for in this movie. And I found the sword fighting, it looks authentic and thrilling. It kind of reminds you of the earlier Zorro movies. I had mentioned Walt Disney's Zorro TV series, but there's also the Mask of Zorro. I ended up watching that earlier with a podcast that's currently defunct. But there was a podcast that was called Filmsomniacs, and I went on their podcast when it was a going concern and talked about the Mask of Zorro. I think they came out in, not the Mask, is it the Mask of Zorro? Now I'm confused. The Mark of Zorro, that's what it's called. So the Mask of Zorro, there was a 1940s version because there's an earlier version, I think came out in 1920. And in the 1940s version, it was actually really good. It was like much, because it's like when you think about watching a movie from 1940, it's like, well, they don't have the modern sensibilities. You don't expect it to be that good, or you don't expect to be entertained, but it was actually really entertaining. And it was a fantastic adaptation of the story or the novel that it was based on. This movie, the other thing that I really liked about it is that it's not a retelling of the original novel. It is a continuation of the story. It is actually a story about passing the torch. It is a story that continues the adventures of Zorro instead of rehashing what some other filmmaker or what some other storytellers might have done, is that they would have just done a retelling of the original story. But they didn't do that here. I think they figured that maybe people were already familiar with the original story and that they wanted to see something new and different. And I'm also thinking about, there was a TV series that recently was on Amazon, and it was, I forgot what it was called, but it was based on Zorro. It looked really good, and I enjoyed most of it. And unfortunately, I didn't actually finish the last episode, but I watched most of it, and it looks really good. And I think what they did was they took a lot of elements from some of the later Zorro novels, and they incorporated into Zorro's origin. So it's basically the same, but they did a lot of embellishment in that series to add to the mythos of Zorro. But it's still the Zorro origin story, where in the case of this movie, I like that it's in continuation. We see Zorro, or we see Diego de la Vega passing on the torch of Zorro from himself to Alejandro. And that's it's one of those fantastic things about this movie. Like when the movie starts off, the other thing I like about it is that how it's letting you know that it's a story. So what I started to say was that the movie starts off, you see Zorro in silhouette, and then he whips out his blade, his saber, and he strikes at the screen a giant Z, and the Z becomes inflamed. And it's like setting it up to let you know that we are about to watch a fairy tale. And it opens basically with Diego de la Vega's last adventure of Zorro. It kind of opens up where the Spanish government, or Spain, or the Spanish crown, is giving up their possession of California to Mexico. And the governor of Mexico, on behalf of Spain, he has to leave, but he can't just leave. He has to cause a lot of fear and confusion. I guess because he's transferring his power to basically the larger landowners, the dons of the area. They're basically carving up the territories of California, and they're going to like rule them as, I guess, rules the larger sections as counties or something. I'm not exactly sure how that works out, but he's handing down his authority to these men who are, I guess, part of the Mexican government, or they have allegiance to the Mexican government or something like that, or whatever. It's like they're not enemies, they're friends, they're companions, but he's being recalled by Spain. So he's causing these shenanigans. He's having innocent men executed just for nothing, right? And that's when Zorro comes in, and Zorro's sole purpose is to rescue these men from an unjust execution. And this adventure that he has rescuing these men is thrilling. It's Anthony Hopkins. I'm not sure if he's doing any of the stunts. I doubt that he is. As a matter of fact, I hope that he didn't do any of the stunts. But both him and his stuntman look like they're having the time of their life doing the Zorro character. During this mission, he meets two young boys while he's sneaking into the plaza, and they're actually the younger version of Joaquin and Alejandro. And during the ruckus, when he's actually fighting with the soldiers, these two same young, and it's like at this time, this is like near the end of Zorro's career. He's adored by the people, and it's like they cheer him on. And so these two young boys look at him as a hero. And like, so during this skirmish that Zorro's having with all these guards, the boys see that Zorro's about to get ambushed, and they help him out. They're able to distract the guards in a way that so they don't kill Zorro. So Zorro is successful. He managed to free the men who are about to get executed. The governor is incensed, and like weird. Like, why would you want to murder these innocent men anyway? That's not fully explained. Other than, I guess, he's just an evil dude. So the governor, Don Rafael Montero, he ultimately has his revenge. Like, Zorro ends up home. He goes home to his wife. He promises his wife and his little baby girl that he's not going to go back out as Zorro again. He basically thinks that he's able to get away with it without being discovered, he's operated all these years and no one ever having figured out that he and Zorro are the same people. What's interesting about the original novel, the original stories, it must have been fantastic reading that back when it was first published, because when it's first published, you don't have any idea who any of these characters are. You're just thrilled reading this adventure. And then you read about two characters. You read about Don Diego de la Vega, who's kind of like a dandy. He doesn't like to fight. He's somewhat cowardly. He cares more about his appearance. He's actually the richest guy in California, or his father is, and he's obviously going to succeed his father. So he's sitting pretty. And I like how that's portrayed in the 1940 film, how he hates to fight, and it's like exerting exercise. It's just so daunting. And so as you read the novel, you also read about Zorro, how he's going out and he's having these adventures. And the novel doesn't tell you that Zorro and Diego de la Vega are the same person. You don't find out until the end of the novel, because at the end of the novel, it's revealed, like his identity is revealed. And as a reader, you find out when everybody else finds out. So that must have been fantastic. You have to be a skilled writer. And I remember reading something like that before when I read Starship Troopers. And this was after I saw the movie. It's one of those things where I saw the movie, I loved the movie, and I was like, well, I got to go read the novel to find out how the novel turns out. The novel is largely the same. I mean, obviously it's going to have more details. The themes are different. It's like where Starship Troopers had treated these themes as satire, the novel kind of treated it as serious. But the thing about the novel is that, like most novels, they don't actually describe the main character other than to say, like, it's a young man in very good physical condition because he's a very good soldier. But then at the very end of the novel, it's revealed that he is Latino. Like, I forgot exactly where he's from. I think he's either Filipino or Latino, but you find out at the end of the novel that, because it's like when you read the novel and they don't actually describe the character, you kind of just assume that the character is white, especially if it's written by a white author. But you find out at the end of the novel that Johnny Rico he's non-white, so he's either Filipino or Latino. That was kind of like a shock to find out at the end of the novel something new about the main character, which is what they did with Zorro and Don Diego de la Vega in the original novel about Zorro. So we go into this movie. We know that the same people. It's the end of Zorro's career. He thinks that his identity is still secret, but then there's a disturbance at the door while he's reading his baby a bedtime story. Basically, not reading his baby bedtime stories. He is telling his baby his adventures as Zorro. And his wife comes in and basically charmed by him and her baby together, and they talk about like building a greater family. Then there's a knock on the door, and it happens. Well, actually, not even a knock, just somebody barges into his hacienda, and it's the governor. It's Don Rafael Montero, and he has a squad of soldiers there, and they're all pointing their weapons. And Don Diego, he's all affable, and because they're supposed to be friends, like, oh, well, you've come by, you can come and have dinner with us or something, something like that. But it's funny that he's talking about he's being all friendly when he's got these gruff and mean soldiers pointing their rifles at him. And that's when Montero reveals that he knows that Don Diego has been Zorro. I don't know how long he's known, but he probably suspected from that night because he's about to leave. He's about to leave for Spain. So this is one more thing that he has to do. And during the fight, Zorro was injured. And he's favoring his arm. You see him favoring his arm the entire time when he gets home. And it must have been during he had a swords fight with Montero. And during the fight, he carved the Z in Montero's neck. So now Montero's in his house. He knows that he injured Zorro on the arm, and he reaches out and grabs Don Diego on the arm, and Diego flinches. And that basically confirms for Montero who these people are. So now he wants to arrest Don Diego, and Don Diego starts to fight, but it's kind of useless because he's tired and he's injured, and his baby and his wife are basically defenseless. And there's a bunch of soldiers. And in the skirmish, his wife is shot and killed by one of the soldiers. One of the elements of the story is that Montero had always wanted Don Diego's wife. I guess they were competing for her affection, and Don Diego won over Montero. So it's like Montero never got over the fact that he lost this woman to Don Diego. So when the soldier kills Don Diego's wife, he stabs the soldier in the gut and kills the soldier for doing that. But after that, he takes Don Diego into custody. During the fight, a fire had started. He gets some soldiers to get Don Diego's baby. He decides that since he couldn't have Don Diego's wife, he's going to take Don Diego's baby girl, Elena. And he won't even let Don Diego hold his baby for the last time, and whisks Don Diego off to jail. And that's like a tragic end to Zorro. It's a tragic end to the Zorro story. It's like the first act of this movie is a tragedy. And that's a bold decision. That's one of the things I really like about the structure of this movie. It's like, oh man, they got Zorro. they actually got Zorro in the end. And then the second act is like 20 years later, and it opens up on the grown-up boys, Alejandro and Joaquin. And it's funny because when you first see them, it looks like they got caught by a bounty hunter, and the bounty hunter is forcing them to walk behind his horse. They're tied by rope to the horse, and so while the bounty hunter is on top of the horse and riding the horse in comfort, riding in what's basically a desert, the two brothers, they got to walk behind the horse. And the bounty hunter, Three-Finger Jack, this is the other real life person that we had talked about. They get to the barracks, and then what you find out is fake out, because it's like there's a bounty on the Murrieta brothers' head. And like when they come to, I guess it's like a police station or police garrison or something like that, or army garrison. I'm not exactly sure of the location, but they go there to collect the bounty. And the soldiers are like, well, we got to take them to this other place. Well, we'll take custody, and then you can just go to town and you can collect your bounty at the town. And obviously the bounty hunter is like, no, we're not doing it that way. You got to pay us now. And then while conversations are going on, the Murrieta brothers are worried about how much the bounty on their heads were. And then they're disappointed when it wasn't higher. And then some commotion breaks out. And then suddenly they get the drop on the soldiers. It turns out that the three men are actually working together. They're in concert. The fact that they were tied up to horses was all staged for the benefit of the soldiers, or I guess anybody who might have been watching them approach the soldiers. And they set themselves up to rob the soldiers and get away with it. So that's an interesting fake out, how at first you see them as prisoners and then they turn out to be working together. They're not prisoners, they are partners. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. We know that these men are the same two boys that Zorro had run into in his last adventure, because Jacqueline is wearing a necklace that was given to him by Zorro. And like when they saved Zorro from the soldiers, Zorro's wearing this medallion, and he puts it around the neck of Jacqueline when he was a child. And now he's grown up, he's still wearing that medallion. And he's the older of the two brothers. It's almost like the screenwriters are telling us this was the guy that inspired the story of Zorro in real life. And obviously I never picked up on it until I did this research. This robbery isn't all the way successful, though. They eventually tracked down by Captain Love. And in the tracking down of the three men, he had shot Three-Fingered Jack, and he killed Jacqueline. And then after killing Jacqueline, he cut off Jacqueline's head. And he also at some point cut off one of Three-Fingered Jack's hand at some point. Actually, I don't know if he did it then or he did it later. Because Three-Fingered Jack, we think that he's dead, but he's actually alive later on, and then he's killed later. So his hand may have been cut off later in the movie. I just watched it yesterday and I've already forgotten the sequence of events. In any case, Jacqueline's head is cut off after he's killed. And it's it's in sight of Alejandro. Alejandro can see it from his hiding place, because he's the only one from the bandits to get away from Captain Love. And Jacqueline had gotten hurt in the skirmish trying to get away from Captain Love. He had convinced Alejandro to go on without him. You know, like you see in other movies when you got two men and they're either brothers or they are friends or whatever, and one of them gets hurt. It's like, go on without me. So that's what happened in this movie. And the way Jacqueline told Alejandro to go on without him is that he punched him in the face, because Alejandro he didn't want to leave his older brother. That's the only family he had. But Jacqueline knew that there was no way that he could go on and he would just get both of them captured. So his brother Alejandro was uninjured. So Jacqueline just basically, he made his younger brother get away from him, and he basically faced off against Captain Love while Alejandro basically got away. Now, this is like 20 or 30 years later. I think it's 20 years later. There have been some political changes in Mexico that allows Don Rafael Montero to return from Spain to Mexico. And one of the first things he does is that he looks for Don Diego de la Vega in the prison that he put him in. Now, I'm not exactly sure why he would do this. I guess he wanted to confirm that Don Diego de la Vega was dead, or maybe he wanted to murder him. I'm not exactly sure, but it was kind of a weird choice for him to be looking for Diego de la Vega. None of the men he recognizes as Diego de la Vega. And like, there's a bunch of men there. They're all dirty, old, and weak. And and disease. Some of them are diseased. Many of them are injured. They don't look like they'd be pleasant to be around. I mean, they're relatively peaceful, but they're not well kept and they're not cared for. So he asked, which one of you men went around as Zorro? Which one of you was the masked bandit Zorro? And then these men remembered Zorro. He's still a beloved figure. So one of them says, I am Zorro. And another says, I am Zorro. And they all claim to be Zorro. It's like the I am Spartacus moment. So, none of the people in the prison he recognizes as Don Diego, and he can't figure out, and like not all the men claim to be Zorro. So he basically gives up and decides that Diego de la Vega must be dead. And the thing about this is that one of the things that was repulsive is that these men obviously stink. He has a cloth up into his nose, like a handkerchief, and he has to cover his nose because the men stink so bad while he's looking for Diego de la Vega. And so basically he gives up and leaves. I guess he's like really worried about Diego de la Vega because he's got some designs on Mexico and California, and he doesn't want. I guess he's superstitious that Diego de la Vega is going to hamper up his plans. But Diego de la Vega is in the prison. He sees the whole thing. He basically stays in the shadows. And actually, there was a point where Montero looks directly at Diego in the face, but he doesn't recognize him. Diego has a band over one eye, so he's giving the effect. He's giving the effect that he's like a one-eyed man. He's dirty. He's got a full-on beard, bushy hair. It's like and he stinks probably, and it's been 20 years, so it's unlikely that De La Vega is going to resemble what Montero remembers him looking like. So now that he knows that Don Montero is back in Mexico, he is going to, that's when he starts to affect his escape. And it can't just be a regular escape where he just kind of like walks out of prison. It's not trickery. It's like there is trickery, but there's a lot of beating up guards and hiding himself in body bags and stuff like that. So, he basically posed as a dead person, and they took his quote unquote carcass out of the prison and into the graveyard and buried him in a grave. It wasn't really 6 feet deep, but it wasn't exactly shallow either. But after, I don't know, I guess a couple of hours, he dug himself out of the grave, and now he's free once again. It seems to me that he could have escaped any time, but I guess he wasn't motivated to escape because he had lost everything that he had ever built. And because of that loss, it's like, what was he going to escape for? Like, for what? For why? And so he just stayed in prison for like 20 years, basically defeated and wallowing in that defeat until Don Rafael Montero shows up. And now he's motivated. Now he has a reason to escape. And he decides that his reason for living was revenge. Like, Montero took everything from Don Diego. So Don Diego is going to get some payback. So he's motivated, he escapes, and now he's free. Now he's on the hunt. I don't know if it's a few days or the next day. Don Montero makes this ostentatious arrival onto the shores of, I guess it's California. And he goes there, he talks to a crowd that was forced to be there of commoners. And he's talking about his grand vision for making California, not for Spain and not for Mexico, but California for Californians. He actually kind of berates the dons that have gathered for the delight of the crowd. And in the crowd is Don Diego, and he decides, well, this is my chance to murder Montero. He doesn't care what happens to him after. He's going to murder Montero. But then also with Montero is Elena. She's introduced as Montero's daughter, but obviously this is Don Diego's daughter. So he sees Elena. Now he can't kill. He can't kill Montero now because his daughter is here, and he sees an opportunity to get his daughter back, or at least make his daughter aware that he's around. His daughter was taken when she was a child, well, like a baby, not even a child, but a baby. And so Montero is the only father that she has ever known. Like, she has no memory of any life before Montero. So, like, she has no memory of her father, of her nanny, of her mother. She has no memories. So that it would be kind of hard to convince this woman, because she's a woman now. She's grown up, 20 years old at least. It'd be hard to convince this woman, like, the father that you've known all your life, that's not your father. I am your father. He stole you from me. How would you convince anybody of that? You sound like a crazy person. But I guess that he has hope that this is something that he could do, that there's some way that he can convince her that he is her father. Later on, Don Diego happens to find Alejandro in a bar. He recognizes the medallion that Alejandro is wearing and realizes that they've met before. He stops Alejandro from trying to kill Captain Love, who happened to be in the area. And he stops him because it's like, because for one thing, Alejandro is drunk, because like he's just drinking at the bar. He almost trades the medallion for just like a shot of whiskey, but Don Diego shuts that down. He convinces Alejandro to come with him, and he would teach him how to get revenge. So in Alejandro, he sees a pupil, like I said earlier. They both have a need to get justice. They're both motivated. They both have a reason for it. There's a lot of great scenes where you have Alejandro trying to challenge Don Diego to a fight, but especially at the bar where Alejandro is drunk, it's like, it's just not going to work out. Alejandro is not, like, he has fought, but he's not a trained fighter. So him not being trained at all in fighting and going up against somebody like De La Vega, who's been fighting all of his life, is like, it's not going to work. So he basically convinces Alejandro to join him. I think he tells Alejandro that he's actually Zorro. So they go to Zorro's lair, which was under the old De La Vega estate. And I guess even though it burned down, nobody actually tried to take it over. And they're not working odd jobs to earn a living and to pay for food. So my guess is because the De La Vega family was so rich, there must have been some money that De La Vega had hidden away, maybe some hidden vault or something like that. They don't explore that. Like, we don't know why that they're able to actually just live, because they're actually just able to train like all day and they don't have to think about substance. They have it. But at the same time, and part of the movie is that Alejandro finds the need to steal a horse. And I don't know if he actually needed to steal a horse, but for whatever reason, he goes out. Maybe De La Vega has money, but he doesn't have that much money. I don't know. It's not fully explained. I know that finances are not a part of the plot of the movie, but these are the things that I tend to think about when it's not. I guess because being somebody who is constantly living, thinking about how to pay for stuff, how to pay for bills, how to pay for food, how to pay for fuel, those type of things, having those concerns, I kind of to project those concerns on people in fiction. Most of the times in stories, these things are explained, but in this story, it is not explained. One of my favorite things was the training montage where De La Vega was training Alejandro, and that was very entertaining. It's obviously these are very particular training techniques. You can't just be like, it can't be regular training. It has to be peculiar training because you're dealing with Zorro over here, and a lot of the things that he has had to do as Zorro, he had to learn like outside of the formal training that he had when he was in Spain. I guess if you're not familiar with the story of Zorro, Don Diego de la Vega was born in Mexico, but his family is from Spain. And so his family sent him back to Spain for military academy. And that's where De La Vega learned how to fight with a sword, how to fight with his fist, how to be disciplined in the army. He had learned all of these things when he was in Spain. And then he gets a letter from his father saying that there's trouble at home. So he is recalled from the military academy to go back home to his family in Mexico. So that is where he got his formal training. And then obviously as Zorro and all the adventures he's had to modify the way he fought. He was already the best fighter in his school, but then comes back home and gets more experience and basically on the job learning as Zorro. So in training Alejandro, he's developed some peculiar training techniques. I like when they first, like when you have a teacher and a student situation, the teacher wants to know how much the student already knows about the subject. So in this case, sword fighting. So Don Diego asks Alejandro, do you know how to use that thing? Referring to the sword. Like, do you even know how to use a sword? And Alejandro says, well, yeah, the pointy end goes into the other man. So that's one of my favorite lines. One of the things that happens is that there's some physical training. So Alejandro has to do push-ups, but he's doing push-ups over like a fire pit. Don Diego's relaxed with his legs on top of Alejandro's back while Alejandro's doing push-ups over this fire pit, just sipping wine, totally relaxed. Like he's sipping wine most of the time where he's training Alejandro. It's like, I like how Anthony Hopkins is so relaxed and calm. Like he doesn't have a care in the world. He's just going through the motions of training this young man to be as good a fighter as he is. So during the training, Alejandro and De La Vega are out one day. They see this beautiful black horse. I forgot the type of horse it was. It reminds Alejandro of De La Vega's original horse. When De La Vega was Zorro, he had a black horse named Tornado. So he liked this horse. The horse was kind of being unruly, and Alejandro was like a kind of horse whisperer because the horse was starting to get away. Alejandro helped the soldiers. He caught up with the horse and he calmed the horse down, and he gives the rein of the horse back over to the soldiers, and the soldiers take him to wherever, I guess the barracks. So I guess it was there that Alejandro had made up his mind that he's gonna take this horse. So that's what I mean, where he goes out and he steals a horse, maybe because he figures that he wants this particular horse and he's not interested in trying to buy a horse. And maybe him trying to buy a horse would look suspicious, at least at that time, because he was not like polished yet. So he dresses himself up kind of like as a makeshift Zorro. It's like he's not. It kind of reminds me of if you watched Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and one of the costume that Miles Morales has like an early costume. It's basically a dime store version of the Spider-Man outfit. So a guy dressed as Spider-Man who's obviously not Spider-Man. So this is the same thing with Alejandro, is sort of dressed like Zorro, but he's obviously not Zorro. He's the color of the mask and cape are wrong. They're not made of the same materials. They're basically a rags deal. He may as well have been dressed in rags. That almost this sort of kind of shaped like Zorro. So he sneaks into the army barracks, and there's this huge, outstanding adventure of him liberating this horse from the army barracks. But after this incredible adventure of him, this is like one of the most fun set pieces in this movie. So after this ostentatious horse thievery, he actually gets away with the horse. And part of that, in his escape, he ends up he has to hide in a church. And in the church is Elena. And when he hides in a confessional, and Elena's already in the confessional, and she confesses some secrets to him. She had actually met Alejandro earlier on a different day, dressed as a poor man Zorro, and she was taken by him. And then when he hid in the confession booth, she is confessing how she felt lust for this bandit that she had seen on the street. So Alejandro was able to get away from that situation, because now Captain Love was also searching for him. Well, he was searching for a bandit of some sort. He wasn't specifically looking for Alejandro. So Alejandro escapes. He's able to escape with the horse. And now he has his own version. But when he gets back to Zorro's lair, Don Diego is like disappointed in him. He's like, you're not acting like Zorro would act. It's like you're more of a buffoon. It's more like Zorro was a servant of the people. He's not serving himself. And they have a little bit of an argument, but Don Diego kind of turns it around and lets them know that they got like one more thing to train Alejandro on, and then they're going to go on a mission. And that is that he's going to train Alejandro how to be a gentleman, like he was, like he was growing up. And so he's going to teach Alejandro how to be charming, how to be an upper class gentleman. And I don't exactly know how long this training took, because basically De La Vega had to coach Alejandro, who's like a street thug, a ruffian, a bandit. This kid has been poor all of his life. He had to teach this guy how to be like an upper class type of gentleman who's been wealthy and rich all of his life, teach him all the mannerisms and stuff. Some undeterminate time later, they end up at this party for rich folks. And now Alejandro, he's been well groomed. He's got these fine clothes. It's clothes that a gentleman would wear. And the question is, what barber did he go to? Where did he get these clothes? That's not well explained. That's what I mean by, Don Diego must have some money and some things stashed somewhere, but they're just not explained. And the movie is moving along so quickly that they're not taking time for you to, you don't get a chance to think about it. It's one of those things where you don't think about this thing until after the movie's over. It's like, where did these clothes come from? Why is he so well groomed? I suppose that De La Vega is a good enough barber that can dandy up Alejandro, but it's unclear. So anyway, with these new clothes, they are able to infiltrate this party. That's where Alejandro meets Don Rafael Montero. Alejandro introduces himself as Don Alejandro Castillo y Garcia. And so that's his other alter ego. he meets Elena again for like the third time, it seems. But this time, it's like Elena obviously doesn't recognize him. The first time she saw him, he was wearing a mask. The second time, she only heard his voice, and he was impersonating a priest. And so this is her third time meeting him, this time seeing him as a proper upper class gentleman. And here, what's interesting about this is that he's affecting the same persona as De La Vega when De La Vega was younger. That is, being a dandy, being afraid of fighting, thinking more about his looks or being more concerned about his appearance than he is about like being a hero or like having any concerns about what commoners are dealing with. So the thing about Elena is that she is concerned about what the poorer folks are going through. And one of the things that slightly turns her off about Alejandro in his guise as a gentleman is that he is not all that concerned about these type of people. He's more concerned about increasing his holdings in order to give a prospective wife a comfortable living. And then they do this thing where it's like he's able to finagle his way into something like a secret meeting. He's able to impress Don Rafael enough to be invited to this, like a secret meeting where Don Rafael is finally going to reveal what his plans is for Alto California, or the northern part of California. And what his plan is, because at this time, it is some kind of province of Mexico, and it is ruled by Santa Anna. What Don Rafael Montero's plan is to make California an independent country. He wants to make a Republic of California. And the way he's going to do that is that he's going to buy California from Santa Anna. And in attendance are all of these dons, are all of the richest men in Mexico, including Alejandro. So their dons are asking, well, how is this possible? It's like, even with all of our money, we don't have the money to buy California. And that's when Montero reveals that they found a diamond mine that Santa Anna does not know about in California. They're mining the gold. Well, not a diamond mine, it's a gold mine. They're mining the gold. They're making the gold into bars. They're stamping the gold with Spanish iconography. So it looks like this is gold from Spain, when in actuality, it's gold from California. And so they're basically, what they're doing is they're stealing gold from Santa Anna, gold that Santa Anna doesn't know about. And they're going to buy California with Santa Anna's own gold. So that is diabolical. That is the grand plan that Don Rafael Montero has. And so all the dons agree to it. Also, one of the things that happened is that Elena's in the market one day, and because the story has to resolve this relationship between De La Vega and what is essentially his estranged daughter, Elena. And so Elena's in the market one day and she confronts a woman, and the woman wants to give her a gift. And she asks the woman, well, why are you giving me this gift? The woman says, I'm giving you this because I used to be your nanny. And then Elena, she says, well, I didn't grow up here. I grew up in Spain. And the nanny says, there's no mistaking the daughter of De La Vega. And apparently she looks exactly like her mother. That's why the nanny recognized her, which is Don Diego de la Vega's wife. And so Elena is weirded out by this experience that somebody would say that she's the daughter of De La Vega. And she hasn't met De La Vega. She doesn't know who that is. Her father never told her about this person named Don Diego de la Vega. She doesn't know. It's just a weird experience for her. But this incident plants the seeds so that at the end of the movie, when Don Diego confronts her, she's able to accept him as her natural father. But that's the contrived part of the movie. It's like the whole movie is enjoyable, but that's a slight thing that they had to finagle with this story, because it doesn't seem to me that a woman would just believe a stranger or anybody that the man that she was raised by her entire life, the only man that she's ever known as a father, is not her father. Especially since her father was not abusive. Like, he was a kind and loving father, and Montero generally loved Elena, like, as his own daughter, and he cared for her. And so, like, he didn't do anything that was untowards Elena. Like, the worst thing that he did was steal her away, but he raised her as his own daughter. So this would be easier to go down if he was villainous towards his daughter, but he wasn't. And he wasn't particularly villainous towards other people. Like, he didn't personally go out and murder people. he was just involved in a bunch of machinations, and a lot of the machinations, I don't know how much of the machinations she understood, and it doesn't seem like he would let her in on most of what they were doing, because the men of his stature are highly misogynistic. So he's not going to let his daughter in on what the men folk are doing. She has no reason to believe that he's an evil person. So at the end of the movie, it gets kind of weird when she acts the way she acts. In any case, Don Diego de la Vega basically gives his blessing to Alejandro, and Alejandro goes full Zorro, and he's got the full Zorro getup. He's got the black horse. He's got the weapons. Curiously enough, he's only using the sword. He's not using, like, all of the paraphernalia. Like, Zorro uses a sword, a whip, and a pistol. He's famous for using the bullwhip, but Alejandro is not. At least at this time, he's not using the whip. He's just using the sword. And he's very good at using the sword. He's every bit as clever and as talented as Don Diego de la Vega at sword fighting. So the Alejandro Zorro, he has to go to the mansion or the hacienda or wherever they were that were having that party, where the governor, or the former governor, Montero, was giving his plans. And he has to steal that information and get it back to the Zorro lair. But nothing actually goes right. He's found out almost immediately, and he has to basically fight his way out. So he has to fight the Captain Love. He has to fight against Montero. He has to fight against all the guards, and do all of this. He eventually makes his escape, and these are some fantastic fighting sequences. The thrilling, the acrobatic, a lot of it reminds me of watching Jackie Chan movies, which one of the things that makes it so thrilling, because he's not just fighting with a sword, but he's using his environment to aid in his combat skills. Another thing that happens is that in his guise as Don Alejandro Castillo y Garcia, he goes on a field trip with Don Rafael Montero and the other Dons, and they go out to the actual mine, and Alejandro sees the conditions of the people who are working these mines, and then he recognizes that a lot of people are just innocent people that have been arrested or detained by the military, and they're forced to work these mines. And one of the people he finds is Three-Fingered Jack. There's an incident where Three-Fingered Jack, he's like basically mouthing off against his captors. He's mouthing off against these dons that have gathered to watch him toil in the mines for this gold. So he gets on like this mining cart, and he has like a pickaxe, and then he's rides down a mining cart with his pickaxe. They're outside of the mine, and he's riding like downhill on a cart. And he's using that to build momentum. He's going to jump out the cart with a pickaxe and he's going to take a swing at one of the Dons or somebody, anybody. He's going to kill somebody. And then he launches himself in the air. And then while he's in the air, Captain Love is able to shoot him and kill him right out of the sky. And then giggling about it. And Alejandro witnesses all of this. Alejandro recognizes and remembers Three Finger Jack, obviously. It wasn't that long ago when he last saw him. He thought that Three Finger Jack was dead, and it turns out that he's actually alive. And after he's shot, he goes over to Three Finger Jack, and Jack remembers Alejandro, even though Alejandro's all cleaned up. He's shaved and sculptured his hair. He's got a neat beard. He's wearing these fancy clothes, but he remembers and he smiles just before he dies. Don Alejandro Castillo y Garcia, if he's going to pretend to be a Don, he needs a servant. And that's when Don Diego de la Vega, he takes on the guise as Bernardo. And what's interesting about that is when he was younger, like in his younger adventurer days as Zorro, when de la Vega's father was still alive, they had a family servant named Bernardo. Bernardo was deaf and mute, but he was the only one in the family that knew that Don Diego de la Vega was actually Zorro. He was the same way Alfred is to Batman, is Bernardo is to Zorro. So when Alejandro assumes the disguise as a nobleman, then Don Diego assumes the guise as his own servant, Bernardo, which I thought was a neat little Easter egg, because I didn't realize that he was disguising himself as Bernardo. I mean, it was just another name to me, and I had forgotten that Zorro had a servant named Bernardo. So I found that to be interesting. Because Zorro had stolen these plans for what Don Rafael Montero was doing for Mexico, there was some thought that Santa Anna might find out what Don Rafael was doing. So Don Rafael decides they're going to have to blow up the mine because they can't let Santa Anna find out what he's up to. He does not have a big enough army to oppose Santa Anna. So they decide they're just going to blow up the mine to hide the evidence. And they're going to have to kill everybody that worked at the mine to hide the evidence. So once again, Zorro and also Diego de la Vega, they end up at the mine to try to rescue all the people that are at the mine. Not necessarily to expose the evidence, but to get the people out of the mine so that they're not killed. This is the final act and the final action sequence of the film. And it's all exciting and thrilling. You have the final confrontation between Alejandro as Zorro and Captain Love. It was at some point during the fight that Captain Love unmasked Zorro to see Alejandro, and they're engaged in this fantastic sword fight. You also have Diego de la Vega having a final confrontation with Don Rafael Montero, because now he's a little bit cleaned up, and now Rafael Montero now recognizes Diego de la Vega. And so this is the part that gets weird, because Elena is there too. And actually earlier at Don Rafael's hacienda, where there was like a scuffle with Don Diego de la Vega, and Elena was there to witness it. And I think what happened was de la Vega was going there, or he went to the house to kill Rafael Montero, but he got basically foiled in the attempt, and he kind of got captured. And Elena had ended up where this fight was happening. And basically he was trying to get Rafael to confess that Elena was actually Don Diego's daughter. So he wanted Elena to hear that she was his natural daughter. So basically this was to reinforce some doubt in her mind of who her real father was. And then later on at the climax, she's actually helping Don Diego, which, like I said, this is a strange man that you hadn't met, who basically pretended to be two different people. He tended to be a man named Bernardo, and then he also pretended to claim that his name was Don Diego de la Vega, but he doesn't look like a Don. He doesn't look like a rich nobleman. He looks like a servant. And so, like, she's at times helping Don Diego de la Vega, and she's at other times seems to be helping Don Rafael Montero. She's like, she's a little bit conflicted, obviously. But in the end, Don Rafael Montero ends up dead. And she kind of just blanketly accepts that Don Diego de la Vega was her father. And she's having this emotional experience. Like at the end of the adventure, Don Diego dies, and like as he's dying, he's having a moment with Alejandro and Elena. And she's all emotional, but she's emotional over a man she doesn't know. So, I mean, they've had some great scenes together earlier where he was talking to her as Bernardo. And so that was a fantastic scene. But still, she doesn't know him. So for her to have this emotional break with him is not... that's why I said that there are parts of the story that are contrived. And you don't really think about it until after the movie is over. Like after you get out of the theater, it's like, what that? You're thinking that part's kind of weird. And so at the very end of the movie, Alejandro and Elena get married, and I guess they're living at the De La Vega estate. I'm not exactly sure if they're living there or they're living in her old estate that her father used to own, the Montero estate. I don't know, but they seem to be doing well. They look like they live in a big house. They're wearing fine clothes. Alejandro is telling his baby son, about his adventures as Zorro, mirroring basically the earlier scene in the movie with De La Vega and baby Elena. It's kind of like a nice book into the story. It makes it feel like a story. I guess this is more of a fairy tale because of all the controversies that have happened, like Elena just blanketly accepting Don Diego de la Vega as her father, and just accepting that she is marrying Alejandro. That's fine, I guess. I mean, it didn't bother me. I felt good after the story is over. It's just that the things that you kind of think about after the story is over. That's it for our favorite parts. And now let's check out our top 10 trivia. Obviously, we get most of our trivia from IMDb, and it is chock full, this movie. At the end, at around 1 hour, 58 minutes, and 5 seconds, when Zorro confronts Captain Love, he pulls out his sword, and the sun glints off the blade, running the full length. This was not CGI. It was suggested by Antonio Banderas. He had to tilt the sword to catch the sun without breaking eye contact with Matt Letcher. It only took 3 takes, and that was amazing. And as a reminder, Matt Letcher is the man who played Captain Love. So Zorro is looking Captain Love directly in the face as he pulls out his sword. And it's supposed to look natural. Like he's not, he's supposed to look like he's not consciously trying to catch the light of the sun against his blade. But that is exactly what he's trying to do. And it looks so natural that as I watched the scene, I was thinking, oh, this is great CGI. That's a nice CGI effect. It's almost corny, but as it turns out, it was real. It was a real effect. It was a practical effect, and it looked fantastic. But it's like, that's why I don't badmouth, though I try not to badmouth CGI, because there are a lot of people that are talking about how much they prefer practical effects as opposed to CGI effects. But my thoughts is that sometimes the effects are so good, sometimes the practical effects are so good that you think that it's CGI. And sometimes the CGI effect is so good that you think that it's practical. The goal is to submerge the viewer into the movie. So you just, it doesn't matter. Just, you got to use the tools that will achieve that effect. And sometimes it's going to be CGI. Sometimes it's going to be LED wall. Sometimes it's going to be practical effects. You got to use all of the tools and blend them together as best you can. And in this case, it was a practical effect. Antonio Banderas was extremely adamant about performing many of his own stunts for authenticity. And, you know, I love the dedication. When I was watching the film, I couldn't really tell the difference if it were a stunt man or if it was the actor. And obviously, if the stunt was too extreme, it's probably the stunt man. Like, there are stunts where that Zorro is jumping out of a window and he lands a straddle on the horse, and that looked like it would hurt. I mean, that's where your dick is. Your dick is between your legs, and you got to land on your horse on the side on the sitting position. That looked like it would hurt a lot. But and I don't think Antonio Banderas was doing that. I think that was probably a stuntman. But it didn't matter because the movie flowed so well that I didn't have any concern about who was doing what. Originally, Sir Anthony Hopkins refused the part of Don Diego de la Vega because of his back pain. A laser operation made it possible for him to accept the part. So, shout out for laser surgery. There is a distinct difference between the costumes for Don Diego de la Vega as Zorro and Alejandro Murrieta as Zorro. Costume designer Graciela Mazon claimed that De La Vega's costume portrayed his Spanish heritage and Alejandro portrayed his